Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst here at PFF, and it is another Waiver Wire Tuesday Fantasy Football Playoff edition. So, who better to break it all down than PFF's lead fantasy analyst, the great Nathan Jahnke. Nate, we're heading into week 2 of the fantasy playoffs, the final 4 in a lot of leagues. We're so close to getting the people home with the fantasy championship. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Last night was a good night. I think we had in the Scott Fish Bowl, all four people who were in part of the Cincinnati live draft advanced from the quarterfinals to the semifinals. So a good day for the Scott Fish Bowl. I believe both of our DraftKings picks hit yesterday, so that was always nice, and had a couple other props that ended up doing well for me as well. So all in all, a good night in terms of all those kind of things. So looking forward to another round of the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, me too. It was a fun Monday night game. We got Jalen Hurts ended up playing. He rushed in for 2 touchdowns. He threw 2 interceptions. Geno Smith did not play. We saw Drew Lock, Matt Patricia calling the defensive plays, and he could not stop the unstoppable Drew Lock. So yeah, not like a ton of out of the ordinary for this game, but we usually do a Monday Night Football recap here, and we did get some strong production from Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks, which was really nice to see. 86 yards and a touchdown on the ground, plus I think 3 catches, 26 yards receiving. There's definitely been a few weeks where the game script and usage hasn't been in his favor. So how did things look this week with the Seattle backfield?
Yeah, this was a little bit business as usual for the Seattle backfield. So a little disappointing that I don't have some stronger takeaways for my last full recap of the season, since this upcoming weekend I'll be doing a little bit more on social media and not writing the full recaps, giving the editors and myself a little more time for the holidays. But we'll still have a top 10 recap next week. But with Walker, the distribution of snaps between Walker and Charbonnet exactly the same as it's been for the past basically 2 months. Whenever both running backs have been healthy, Walker taking the clear majority of early down snaps, all short yardage stuff. Charbonnet taking all of the passing down work and being the primary backup on early down. So this is what we've seen before. The big difference in this one is the offense was really relying on Walker whenever he was on the field. Off to a kind of slow start, but then really by the third quarter, a little bit in the second quarter as well, Walker started to put together some big runs. So even when they were playing from behind in the middle of the second half, they were still a run heavy team because running with Walker is what was working for the offense. So good to see Walker have a fairly good game, especially after Charbonnet had been playing well and potentially could have been taking some time away from Walker, but that no longer seems to be the case in Seattle.
Yeah, it was definitely at least nice to see for Kenneth Walker managers that usage kind of solidify for him. I mean, not a ton else for Seattle from what I could tell. Like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba had the really nice touchdown at the end there. Anything else from the Seattle side of things that you took away from this
Yeah.
game that was different?
Not really. Just good to
Yeah.
see DK Metcalf playing so well on that last drive of the game, and then Jackson Smith-Njigba getting that last touchdown, getting the over on the yards was nice to see at the end as well.
Yeah, that was definitely good. Clutch touchdown there at the end for the rookie. On the Philadelphia side of things, again, fairly common usage for the receiving corps that we've seen from them. We've been kind of hoping for a bounce back game for DeAndre Swift. We talked about that when we went over our DraftKings picks yesterday, I guess it was now. So he did, like you said, he hit the rushing over. Not like a huge game for him, 74 rushing yards and not a lot as a receiver. But what did the at least the Philadelphia backfield look like to help get DeAndre Swift back on track this week?
Yeah, this a lot of it just had to do with the opponent and the game script. So Philadelphia was able to run the ball more. So even over the first 3 quarters, he ran for 55 yards, which was more than the last 2 games put together. Um, when I was charting the game, it really felt like a game from last season where it was now Swift instead of Miles Sanders, but how they were using the running backs, it was a very clear Swift early down back gain while the third down back. But then there were times where after a third down, they like to rush to do the next play, which meant Gainwell would stay on the field for another play. And that happened a bit last year, and it was at least a little bit unique to Philadelphia, and they were doing that again in this game. It really led on that first drive to Gainwell having 4 carries on that drive. He hit his over on rushing yards within that first drive alone, and then only ran the ball 2 more times over the rest of the game. But I think this was a good time for Swift. It wasn't a great day. He had a couple of nice runs, no huge runs. Ended the day with 74 rushing yards, which was one of his better games of the season. But I think really looking ahead, they face the Giants and the Cardinals the next 2 weeks. 2 games where Philadelphia, even though they've been on this down streak recently, should be able to play really well against the opponents. It's really been a tough stretch of games for Philadelphia recently. So I think they should be able to run the ball plenty against those teams. So if you've had Swift and have been disappointed with how he's played over the past 2 months or so, I think he should be doing a bit better over these next 2 weeks.
Nice. Yeah, love the matchups here going forward for him. Anything else from the Eagles side of things to take away from this one?
Only other note is Julio Jones was playing a bit more than he had been in recent weeks. I know he's been a little bit banged up at times, and then Quez Watkins returning from injured reserve is really what led Jones to see a big decrease in playing time. But we started to see a bit more rotation at that third wide receiver spot, a little bit less of Olamide Zaccheaus. So it's not going to be impacting anyone's starting lineups, but anyone doing any kind of DFS or single game contest involving the Eagles. Good to know that Jones is playing a bit more and Zaccheaus playing a bit less.
Nice, like it. All right, we're going to get into the waiver wire targets here in just a sec, but a quick ad break from our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life. As a parent, you've had to learn so many new skills to provide for your family: how to do copious amounts of laundry, meal plan for even the pickiest eater, and now how to protect your family's financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life provides an easy one-stop shop for your family's financial needs, offering high-quality term life insurance policies plus other financial solutions in one easy online hub. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget, with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You could go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy. meetfabric.com/fantasy. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, Nate, we are going through it now. Fantasy playoff bye weeks are done. These final 2 weeks are really what we've all been waiting for and building toward all season long. So it's now or never to add some depth and potential starting pieces to help secure the fantasy championship. So let's start with the quarterbacks, a position that has been completely depleted by injuries at this point in the season, to the point where there are some names on our waiver wire list that I would have never guessed in a million years we'd be considering at this point in the season. But desperate times call for desperate measures, obviously, and there may not be better choices available to you. So let's start with a name that at least isn't that big of a surprise since he's been on the list for a long time. It's Derek Carr of the New Orleans Saints, Nate. I think you're on mute as well. So. Oh, still no audio for Nate. We've lost them. Just give him a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're back.
Okay. Cam audio, we'll try to get that fixed eventually. But so Carr, he's either had good games and we're like, okay, he's played well, and then there's the schedule in the fantasy playoffs, or he's had bad games and we're like, okay, it's not good right now, but once the fantasy playoffs hit, things will go well. And the fantasy playoffs started last week, and he threw 3 touchdowns without having Chris Olave or Michael Thomas. So things are looking up for Carr. He's been able to play well. He didn't even show up on the injury report after showing up in recent weeks with 3 or 4 different ailments. So Carr is finally healthy. Ideally, we'll see Chris Olave back. It does not sound like we'll have Michael Thomas back this week, but a chance he'll be back for the fantasy championship week. But they play the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday night, Tampa Bay Buccaneers the following week. both teams among the top 7 in allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So Carr, not someone who's going to put up top 5 numbers for the most part with how much they like to run the ball and how little Carr actually runs the ball. So don't see him being a top 5 quarterback in either of these weeks, but I think he's fully capable of being a top 10 quarterback in both of these matchups.
Yeah, it makes sense. And we like the schedule in the fantasy playoffs. And we saw it already this past week. He was, I believe, inside the top 10, just like you said, here in week 15 against the Giants. So that was definitely nice to see. And like you said, favorable schedule here going forward. So potentially, like you said, another potential top 10 finish. So another quarterback here, one of the newer appearances on the list this season, because Minnesota, also another team dealing with obviously injuries to Kirk Cousins and the benching of Josh Dobbs. But Nick Mullins makes the list, and he is rostered in just 6.2% of ESPN leagues. So what do we like about Nick Mullins going forward?
Yeah, the Vikings quarterbacks in general have been good fantasy options this season. Kirk Cousins was a top 12 fantasy quarterback 5 of his 7 games. Joshua Dobbs in 3 of his 5 games with Minnesota. So obviously a lot of that has to do with the receivers. They have Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, an offense that loves to pass the ball. Not the best run game in the world, so that also contributes to things. So Mullins was similarly able to put up big numbers in this offense, over 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, although he also had the 2 interceptions in the overtime loss to the Cincinnati Bengals. So he is someone that if Derek Carr is not available in your league and you are desperate for a quarterback, the Vikings play the Lions this upcoming week. Lions have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, a game where the Vikings need to win to stay in the playoff race, and the Lions are looking to secure their division win as well as playoff seeding. So a game that I think should be competitive, a game where I think the Lions will be ahead. So Mullins and the Vikings should need to pass a lot this week. So in deeper leagues, if you need a quarterback, Mullins is the guy that I'd consider.
Nice, like that. And then another one here, potentially for those deeper leagues as well. And another one of those names that you never would have guessed at the beginning of the season, but it is Tommy Cutlets, Tommy DeVito of the New York Giants, rostered in 8% of ESPN leagues. Another guy with a decent schedule, at least as far as points to fantasy quarterbacks go here, right, Nate? Going against the Eagles this week. What do we like about Tommy DeVito? I know he left last game as well with a potential concussion.
Yeah, he didn't have the greatest game, only had 177 yards, and he missed that little bit of time as well. But a lot of it's the schedule. I was trying to find a quarterback that in the week of the fantasy championship had at least a decent game. And DeVito's the only one who really came up facing the Los Angeles Rams in 2 weeks from now. And then, like you said, plays the Eagles next week. And that's another team that's allowed plenty of fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So assuming DeVito plays this week, also an option for both games. So mostly have him on the list because I wanted someone who's available in over 90% of ESPN leagues, who has a decent matchup in the championship game that I could potentially rely on. And then it's an added bonus that he could potentially have a good week this upcoming week as well.
Nice. Like it. Yeah. It's hopefully your league doesn't penalize sacks or anything like that too much, because going against the Eagles defensive line here, that would be the one killer, because it's just the Giants offensive line has been really, really poor this year. But definitely some potential there, which you like. So those are our quarterbacks. Short list this week. We only got a couple weeks left. Again, there's just not many quarterbacks left standing. So those are the options here heading into week 16. So we'll move to the running back position now. And one that we kind of talked about yesterday, right? In with the Atlanta Falcons backfield, we talked about the disappointing usage of Bijan Robinson and how Tyler Algier worked in there. He led the team in carries with 14, doubling Bijan Robinson's running back carries. So Tyler Algier is the first name on the list here, rostered in 38% of ESPN leagues. What do you like about Algier going forward?
Yeah, there were a number of players available in over 50% of leagues who had double-digit carries this past week, but almost all of them outside of Algier, it was because of an injury to a starting running back, and Algier was kind of the clear exception of a guy who could continue to see double-digit carries over these next 2 weeks, even without worrying about the health of the other running backs on the roster. Arthur Smith has been fairly unpredictable from one week to another, who ends up getting the football a lot. But I think because of the matchups these next 2 weeks against the Indianapolis Colts, against the Chicago Bears, two teams where Atlanta should at least be able to stay competitive in these games, if not have a lead in these games, and that will allow Atlanta to run the ball a ton. They announced this morning that they're making a switch at quarterback again, so another reason why they will probably rely on the run game, because they haven't been able to trust their quarterbacks this season. So even if they go back to Robinson being the lead back and the player who's getting the majority of the carries, I think this will be a situation where we could potentially see both running backs see double-digit carries in these upcoming games, in which case Algier could have, again, 10 to 15 carries, and I think could be even more efficient against some of these other defenses. So it's not someone that I'm excited to start, but I think there's at least a possibility of him having a big game, but also a possibility that he really doesn't do much as well.
Yeah, he's obviously anything out of Atlanta is going to be risky, right? But like you said, there's the potential there. We've seen him get the carries. He's facing the Colts and the Bears the next 2 weeks, so decent schedule here for Tyler Algier, and at least we know that Arthur Smith will go to him. I mean, it seems to be random at times, but there's going to be potential there for touches, which is what we're really looking for, especially in some of those deeper leagues. So, next name on the list, this one really was a nice one this week. Ty Chandler of the Minnesota Vikings, rostered in just under that 50% threshold, the 46%. Had a huge game this week with Alexander Mattison out dealing with that ankle injury. I haven't seen anything about Alexander Madison's availability for this week, so for how good Ty Chandler has been, I think we were kind of hoping that maybe Madison misses another week here. So how do you feel about Ty Chandler for the next 2 weeks?
Feeling decently well about him. The matchup next week against the Lions is not great, but I think out of all of the running backs who stepped up due to an injury, I think he's the one that could continue to have the starting job even if Madison comes back with how well he played. That's a big thing with him, is it sounds like he could very well be a feature back. He was kind of rotating in and out with Madison, and he played better than Madison has been this past week. So even if Madison does come back, I'm still have some trust in Chandler. It'll again feel similar to Algier in that you're really gambling of if Chandler will be the feature back, even if they say he will be the feature back, but he could end up just splitting time again if Madison has a big run, because Minnesota throughout the season has changed what they've done all the time at running back. If someone's playing well or poorly, even within the middle of the game, we've seen very different swings in how they are utilizing the running backs. So, like I said, Lions this week, where I think they'll be passing the ball a lot, maybe not running the ball too much. So I don't expect Chandler to have quite as big of a game if he is the starter again this week. But the following week against the Green Bay Packers, the Packers have allowed plenty of fantasy points to running backs this season and recently. So I could see Chandler having a big week, especially in the fantasy championship week.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And like you said, he's just been more efficient, more effective than Alexander Madison as well. And nice to see, like, again, maybe not the best matchup this week, but you love to see that volume and the amount of touches that he got this past week. 23 carries for 132 yards and a touchdown. Had a few receptions in there as well. So really encouraging stuff for Ty Chandler's usage going forward. If Alexander Madison misses more time, but even if he doesn't, I mean, Chandler just has clearly been the better back this year. All right, next name on the list, it is Isaiah Spiller of the Los Angeles Chargers, rostered in 0.3% of ESPN leagues. Thursday night was a weird game where the usage for these running backs was all over the place. Austin Eckler really ineffective here, but Isaiah Spiller got the majority of the touches here for the Chargers running back. So like his potential here in deeper leagues, Nate?
Yeah, we had seen 2 weeks ago he started to be active again after being a healthy inactive for most of the season. Kind of overtook Joshua Kelly as the backup running back in that game. And then this week, it again started with Eckler and Kelly splitting the time, but then Spiller joining the rotation in the middle of it. And with how much they were getting blown out, they just kind of stuck with Spiller over the rest of the game. He was the other exception, along with Algier, of a player who saw double-digit carries without seeing any kind of injury to a different running back. So the Chargers out of playoff contention now. They have changed their head coach, made other changes within the organization as well. So they are really looking ahead to next season at the moment. And I would not be surprised if Eckler is not part of their long-term plans and they want to see what they have in some of their younger players and what they can do going forward. So Chargers play the Buffalo Bills this week. It's not at all a good matchup for the running backs for the team whatsoever. But I think you can pick up Spiller now just to see how they're using their running backs in that game and to see if they are trying to see what they can get out of the young players a bit more, because the following week they play the Denver Broncos, who have allowed plenty of fantasy points to running backs this season. So I think you pick up Spiller now, see how many snaps he gets this upcoming week, and if he plays significantly in that game, even if he's not playing well because they're facing the Bills, I think you can trust him more against the Broncos the following week. So that would be the reason to pick up Spiller. And like you said, we're at a point where there's only 2 more weeks left in the fantasy playoffs. We were talking about Zach Charbonnet earlier in the episode and how he was kind of the clear number 2 with Walker playing well. I don't think you need to keep someone like Charbonnet on your roster, since if Walker gets injured, then Charbonnet would be great. But if that doesn't happen, there's no reason Charbonnet should be starting in most leagues at this point. So I'd rather take a chance on someone like Spiller, who could be the starter and could have a big week 17 without any injuries.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Like you said, Austin Eckler doesn't seem to be in their long-term plans. It's hard to blame him. It just hasn't looked like the same player this year. Obviously, he's going to be looking for a new contract and stuff like that. But I would imagine that we see Isaiah Spiller get more involved as well going forward. Another player that has been on the list for a while in the handcuff section, but finally got his opportunity to start also on Thursday night. It was Zamir White of the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously, Josh Jacobs missed last game. He's still questionable for this week. So Zamir White's still available in a decent chunk of leagues here, over 90% of ESPN leagues. Nate.
Oh yeah, White put up decent numbers this past week, but obviously the game script was one that very much favored the Raiders. So if anything, it was a little surprising that White didn't get even more work. But he basically filled the shoes for Josh Jacobs in terms of how he was used in that backfield, consistently on the field in rushing situations, and he ended up scoring a touchdown. So that was great to see. The matchups over these next, at least this upcoming week against Kansas City, is not great. I could see the Raiders falling behind in that game, in which case it would be a lot more Amir Abdullah than Zamir White. But the week after that against the Colts is a much better matchup for the Raiders running backs. It's just a matter of how long Josh Jacobs is out for. Unlike the Minnesota situation where we could see Ty Chandler still potentially being the starter, even if Alexander Madison is back, I think the second that Josh Jacobs is in a decent place, Jacobs is back to being the starter, and Zamir White is back to barely seeing any playing time. So haven't really heard anything about Jacobs this week, and we haven't really heard any reports of like long-term how long they think Jacobs will be out for. But I think it's still fine to stash White until we find out more news on Jacobs, because even if you're not starting him this week, you might want to start him in week 17.
Yeah, I'm with you. Just as a speculative ad, it's definitely worth it here. Essentially, kind of taking over that Josh Jacobs role with Jacobs out, and yeah, there's definitely potential that he could miss another week. So White could have some usage here. Another player that filled in because of injury, it was Clyde Edwards-Helaire of the Kansas City Chiefs. Also had a pretty strong game, not rushing the ball, 13 carries for 37 yards, but added 4 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown. That was the big difference maker there. It seems like Isaiah Pacheco could be back this week with that shoulder injury, but nothing official yet. So with Pacheco potentially still on the shelf, Clyde Edwards-Helaire has kind of established himself as a nice waiver option for sure.
Oh yeah, he had a good game, not necessarily in terms of yards per carry, but they do have some nice matchups coming up. Did end up with over 20 PPR points, which was great to see. He was utilized exactly how we would expect, taking a lot of those early down snaps, short yarded situations, even seeing some snaps at the goal line, which was great to see, even though Jerick McKinnon still saw a snap near the goal line and ended up throwing a touchdown, or at least getting credit for a passing touchdown on that short pitch forward. But that counts for passing touchdowns and counts for fantasy points regardless. So McKinnon also ended up with a decent game, but they are expecting Pacheco back this week, so I would not rely on Edwards-Helaire whatsoever. I still might pick him up just in case there is a setback for Pacheco for whatever reason. So would be fine having Edwards-Helaire on my bench just to wait and see and make sure Pacheco's good to go. But all signs are pointing towards Pacheco playing this week, so I don't think you can really rely on Edwards-Helaire definitely being in your lineup this week.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, next name on the list is Trey Sermon of the Indianapolis Colts. So the Colts also kind of banged up here in their backfield. Zach Moss, we saw suffer an injury last game. Jonathan Taylor's still out, maybe comes back this week. I don't know for sure yet, but Trey Sermon is the next man up here for Indianapolis.
Yeah, we saw Zach Moss. He was playing 100% of offensive snaps, then got injured on a horse collar tackle, didn't return to the game. So we saw a combination of Sermon and Tyler Goodson kind of split the role over the rest of the game. But Trey Sermon saw a little bit more of the snaps on early downs, a little bit more of the snaps on late downs, ended up with more carries. And I think the really interesting thing here is that the backup running backs were looking a lot more effective than Zach Moss was. So even though there have already been reports that Moss is going to try playing this upcoming week, I'm not sure we're going to see Moss take over 80% of snaps like he's been doing when Jonathan Taylor's been out. I think the backup running backs played too well, and Moss has been a little bit more inefficient than he was early in the season. So we could see a bit more of a committee of a backfield. There's a chance Sermon could be the top guy in the backfield, but there's also a chance Jonathan Taylor could be coming back. And this upcoming week, the matchup isn't all that great against the Atlanta Falcons, so not the best situation, but I still included him because there's at least a chance that he is the starting running back this week, a chance that he sees upwards of 15 carries again. So because that's at least a possibility, definitely wanted to include him on this list, and especially in some leagues where a lot of the guys we already talked about are already taken. And if you want to just throw a shot at a player, I think Sermon's someone worth adding to your bench because of that.
Nice. I like it. And then last running back on the list here, a name we've talked about for a couple weeks now, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. We've seen him get a little bit more involved in recent weeks, looks a little bit more explosive when he does get his touches. Not a huge game this past week, but Chase Brown's still available in over 90% of leagues, Nate.
Yeah, there was a time in the game where he was leading the backfield in both carries and targets. Did leave the game for a little bit late in the game and was able to come back, but really he has looked fairly good, even though Joe Mixon having a little bit less playing time has also made Mixon a little bit more efficient. So I don't see Brown fully taking over the backfield at any point this season, and the matchups are okay, not great against the Steelers and Chiefs over these next 2 weeks, but again, if you're just looking for a running back to take a shot on just to see, hey, maybe Brown does lead the team in carries this upcoming week or something like that, and then maybe you start him in week 17, I think that's kind of the situation you're looking for here. But really, this probably is more to do with what could happen with the Bengals backfield next year than Brown potentially being able to help you and your fantasy team this year.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right, we'll move on to the wide receivers in a second. But first, I want to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players if they will go more or less than their Prize Picks projection. You can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. So, Nate, what do you like about, or what do you like for your Prize Picks props this week?
I'm going to go with Raheem Mostert, more than 57.5 rushing yards against the Dallas Cowboys. Just was scrolling and making sure that the number did not change on me while we've been talking. We just saw the Cowboys face the Buffalo Bills this past week, where James Cook had 25 carries for 179 yards. The Cowboys defense in general these past couple weeks have been allowing a bit more rushing yards than they were at times early in the season. And we have really seen this Dolphins backfield. It's been Mostert as the main guy, even with Devin A. Chain back in the lineup. He's been more of the passing down back, and a lot of his work has come in blowout wins where Mostert, whenever a game's been competitive, he's been the main guy running the ball for the team. And against the Cowboys, I expect it to be more of a competitive game. So we might see more of Mostert than we usually do in this matchup. So I think the combination of how Dallas has played against the run and how the Dolphins' backfield has looked in competitive parts of games and how well Mostert has played, of course, throughout the season. I think Mostert is very well capable of getting more than 57.5 yards and could have a very big game if the Dolphins need him to.
Nice. Yeah, I really like that one. So I'm going to go with Gabe Davis, more than 33 and a half receiving yards. I know people are probably thinking I'm crazy. He hasn't had a catch in 2 straight games, which if you listen to the preview show or you read the Man Zone wide receiver report on PFF.com, we kind of warned about Gabe Davis here because he's been really, really poor against man coverage. He was going up against some of the man-heavy defenses in Kansas City and Dallas the past 2 weeks. We saw this against the Jets for him. We saw it against the Bengals even before that. So there's definitely been a pattern here with Gabe Davis and his production. So going against the Chargers on Saturday night, who are not a man-heavy team, and they just let the Raiders score 63 on them, 33 and a half receiving yards for Gabe Davis feels like a safer number. I don't think he's going to get 0 again. So I'm going to go with Gabe Davis more than 33 and a half receiving this week. Maybe not a ton more because, again, he hasn't done a lot this year, but at least over that 33 and a half number. All right. At Prize Picks, you aren't competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. Go to prizepicks.com/PFF Fantasy. Use code PFF Fantasy for first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFF Fantasy and use code PFF Fantasy for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, moving on to the wide receivers, Nate. And the first name on the list was the first name on the list last week as well. It's Noah Brown of the Houston Texans, another guy that had 0 catches in back-to-back games. And we'd kind of talked about him, having obviously more potential than that with Tank Dell and Nico Collins out. We've already seen it from him earlier in the year. And he did bounce back in a nice way, and still available out there is Noah Brown.
Oh yeah, always nice when we talk about someone because of what they could do, and on social media you get a lot of, well, he hasn't caught a pass in the last couple of games, and like, well, that's okay. And even with the quarterback situation, they had Case Keenum at quarterback, and he still caught 8 passes for 82 yards and a touchdown as the Texans' top wide receiver. He and Robert Woods and Xavier Hutchinson were playing basically the whole game, not a lot of rotating out of the Houston wide receivers like we're kind of used to. So they did this against the Tennessee Titans, which they play that team again in 2 weeks from now. So even though I don't remember their matchup off the top of my head this upcoming week, but really want to get him because of what he can do. Okay. Yeah. So really want him for what he can do in 2 weeks from now against the Tennessee Titans again. Even if Nico Collins is back, we've seen plenty of times where the Texans, either the number 1 or number 2 wide receiver, have put up huge games throughout the season. So even if Nico Collins is back for that game, still trusting Brown a lot against Tennessee again in 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, not necessarily the best matchup this week against Cleveland, but I mean, if Nico Collins misses this next game as well, I mean, there's at least potential there, right, for him to be the top target for the Houston Texans. But yeah, really like that matchup against Tennessee. All right, next name on the list, it is Curtis Samuel of the Washington Commanders. So had a really nice game this past week, 9 targets, 5 catches, 41 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And he is rostered in 42% of ESPN leagues.
Oh yeah, this is really 3 straight games for Samuel where he's put up big numbers, where like he's one of those kind of veteran receivers that we've seen for a long time and know he's not going to be a consistent top 10 player or anything like that. But after the first game, it's like, okay, that's good to see, but we're probably not going to see that kind of game again. And then he does it twice in a row, and it's like, okay, maybe I should start paying attention. And after 3 games, it's like, okay, you're a big part of the offense right now. And it kind of makes sense with Eric Bieniemy and how much they've liked the slot receivers in it when he was with Kansas City, and he's a clear slot receiver for Washington. And I think that makes it pretty interesting if you're looking for a wide receiver specifically for this upcoming week, because they are playing the New York Jets, and the Jets have a good defense, but their best cornerbacks play on the outside. They've been arguably the best team at stopping outside wide receivers I think they've allowed the second fewest receiving yards to outside receivers this season, only one receiving touchdown to outside receivers. So not looking great for Terry McLaurin or Jahan Dotson for this game, but they haven't been quite as dominant against slot receivers. Still have been decent against slot receivers, but I think with how much Washington is fine throwing the ball, especially in close games, and how Samuel is probably the wide receiver who can best take advantage of the Jets defense, I could see Samuel seeing a ton of targets this week. So obviously not the greatest situation, and hopefully you have better receiving options on your roster already. But if you do need a wide receiver specifically for this week, I think Curtis Samuel is the guy that I'd be looking at.
Nice, makes sense. Another name on the list, and it is Dontavian Wicks of the Green Bay Packers, rostered in 3% of ESPN leagues. Just led the Packers in receiving this week with 7 targets, 6 catches, 97 yards. You like the potential here for Dontavian Wicks to keep things going in week 16, Nate?
Yeah, the big thing is that Christian Watson and his injury, he missed this last game, which allowed Wicks to be a starter. So I think he really needs Watson to miss another game in order for Wicks to be a fantasy starter again. Because in past games, when everyone's been healthy, Wicks has kind of rotated in among both Watson and Dobbs. So I think that's a big thing. But Green Bay, they have a number of young wide receivers that we've talked about and tight ends as well. We've had probably 5 or so different receivers we've talked about on the waiver wire show throughout the year, but Wicks has graded the best out of all of those players. He's the only one at 2 yards per route run or better among their wide receivers and tight ends. So he's arguably been playing the best out of all the players on this team, and just put up his second game of over 90 yards in the last couple weeks. Play the Carolina Panthers and Minnesota Vikings, which they aren't necessarily the greatest matchups, but just in terms of his talent and how well he's played, I think it's worth considering, because the Packers are kind of going to be desperate for wins these next couple weeks as well. So they need a wide receiver to step up. So I think it'll be interesting to see if Wicks is again a major part of this offense, and really going forward, it'll be interesting seeing in 2024 what they end up doing with their wide receiver and tight end rotation, since everyone's going to be coming back to the team. No one's nearing the end of their contract, and they have 4 good young wide receivers, 2 good young tight ends. So we might see the tight ends kind of cancel each other out for fantasy purposes. We might see some of these wide receivers start to cancel each other out, or might see a different one having a big game each week. It'll be really interesting to see, but short term, I think Wicks is playing too well to kind of ignore at this point. So available in a ton of leagues. So I think worth at least having on your bench. See if he does well against Carolina, Carolina's strength has been really stopping wide receivers. So maybe not this week, but if he remains a starter for the next 2 weeks against Minnesota, that could be a huge game for him.
Yeah, there is definitely something a little bit funny, though, about Green Bay getting all these secondary receiving options that are really, really good after Aaron Rodgers has left the team, which obviously outside of Devontae Adams hadn't had much in recent years. And now they seem to have a whole bunch of options. And Dontavian Wicks is just another name on the list here. So moving on to Rashid Shaheed of the New Orleans Saints, rostered in 21.5% of ESPN leagues. He's been on this list for a while. We talked about, him getting much better usage with Michael Thomas out of the lineup. And we did see that this past week. Didn't have a huge game by any means, just 4 targets, 3 catches, 36 yards. But the usage being the key thing here for Rashid Shaheed.
Yeah, the Saints wide receivers this past week looked very similar to several years of the Saints wide receiver rotation, where they would rotate their players in and out a ton. No wide receiver played more than 60% of offensive snaps, but they had some wide receivers that were clearly in for run plays, like Marquez Callaway, and then Shaheed was mostly in for passing plays. So he did lead the wide receivers in terms of routes run, with Chris Olave out. Only had 4 targets, which led to 3 receptions for 36 yards. Not too concerned about his production in this game, just because he was coming off of the injury, had missed those few weeks. So not too concerned there was against the Giants, and the Giants are also the most man-heavy team. He's played at least a little bit better against zone defenses this season as well. So really looking for him for the Week 17 matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where the Buccaneers have allowed the sixth most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. So I think we can see what Shaheed can do with another game back. Even if Chris Olave is healthy, I think he'll still be running plenty of routes. And hopefully he puts up a little bit better production this week so you can trust him a bit more for Week 17.
Nice. I like it. Another name on the list here, it is Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants, rostered in 6.3% of ESPN leagues. Nice usage for him as well. A season high, 91% of routes run, which is a really good number for him. Didn't get a ton of targets, obviously 4 targets, 4 catches, 25 yards. But again, the usage is there. There's potential for targets. We like the matchups going forward. So yeah, tell us more about Wan'Dale Robinson, Nate.
Yeah, this is, again, looking for wide receivers who are available in at least 90% of ESPN leagues, which Wicks qualified for that, but there's a chance that Christian Watson is back, and then you can't rely on Wicks for this upcoming game. So looking for a wide receiver who could have a big week this upcoming week, and Robinson fits that. Paris Campbell has been the player he's been competing with for snaps in the slot, and Campbell was a healthy and active this past week, so that was pretty big news for Robinson. And even though he didn't put up the biggest numbers in this game, he has had some fairly good games this season, and they're facing the Philadelphia Eagles this week. And the Eagles have allowed plenty of fantasy points to wide receivers this season. Robinson, since week 4, when he became fully healthy, has led the team in targets and receptions. I know Darius Slayton is coming off a big game and is also someone you could consider for the matchup this upcoming week, but Slayton has been a bit more inconsistent, has 9 games with 35 or fewer yards this season. So Robinson is probably the guy among the Giants wide receivers that I'd be willing to trust the most. And Philadelphia, they've allowed plenty of fantasy points both to outside and slot receivers. So I think the fact that Robinson does play predominantly in the slot is perfectly fine. We just saw Jackson Smith-Njigba score that touchdown and have over 40 yards against the defense, even when Seattle's passing offense really didn't do much until that last drive of the game. So I think Robinson is capable of having a good week, especially because the game script for this game should be different than it was last night. I'd expect the Eagles to have a lead of potentially double digits early on, where Giants should need to pass the ball a lot.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm with you. I think that would be the lone wide receiver that I would trust over there in New York as well. And then last wide receiver on the list, another name that has been on here quite a bit, finally got back healthy. It's Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals, rostered in just 4% of ESPN leagues. We saw him back this week. Didn't do anything, obviously, just 3 targets, no catches. But Hollywood Brown banged up. Michael Wilson still potential here to be more involved in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, this has always been the Cardinals play the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 17. So if you need a wide receiver for the fantasy championship game that's widely available, Wilson could be that guy. And like you said, he came back from the injury, and with Marquise Brown out, that could be huge for him. Wilson's playing time was the same that it's been basically right before his injury, which was really good to see. It wasn't like a number of other situations where we saw guys come back from injury and they were pretty limited in their playing time when they came back. So I think Wilson, especially considering he's made a ton of big plays early in the season, he was among the top 40 players in receiving yards before his injury. The big thing is he has to earn Kyler Murray's trust, and he doesn't have too much time left to do that for this season. So most of his production came with Joshua Dobbs at quarterback. And this past week, we saw not just Trey McBride have an amazing game, but we saw their backup tight end have the second most receiving yards, their third string tight end have the third most receiving yards for the team. So hopefully we see a bit more targets out of Wilson this upcoming week so we can trust him a bit more when he faces Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's the hope there for sure. Hopefully, he could beat out one of those tight ends for receiving production this coming week and in the weeks ahead. Speaking of tight ends, let's move to our tight end waiver wire targets. And the first name on the list, he has been a touchdown machine as of late. Apparently, it is Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots, rostered in 17.6% of ESPN leagues. Nate, it's been an up and down season for Hunter Henry, but we look to be back in on him for these final weeks of the year.
Oh, yeah, it was nice. I had him penciled in as the player that I'd have at the top of this list before the game happened, and then he caught the 7 passes for 66 yards and a touchdown, so that made it a bit more easy to put him at the top of the tight end list. He's been fairly inconsistent throughout the season. Started the season well with 3 games over 50 yards, and then had a 10-game stretch where he was averaging 17 yards per game, which is not great. But these past 2 weeks, he turned 29 years old. He's a new man now. Caught the 2 touchdowns a week ago, and then the 1 touchdown this week. So throughout his career, he's been very highly dependent on scoring touchdowns. But he faces the Denver Broncos this week. Denver has allowed the second most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So I think the matchup is the big thing with him, where he is very capable of scoring a touchdown against Denver, in which case you'd probably be happy having him in your lineup. So specifically, if you are looking for a tight end this week, Henry would be the guy, but hopefully you are not looking for a tight end this week, considering the position is relatively healthy at the moment outside of Mark Andrews, who's still on injured reserve as expected, but we've had mostly tight ends coming back from injury recently. So hopefully you don't need a tight end, but if you do, Henry is the player to consider.
Nice. Yeah, makes sense. He could have even had a second touchdown this past game, but it was called back due to penalty as well. So yeah, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. Like you said, he's a new man now that he's 29. That is yeah, an interesting statistic there for Hunter Henry. The other tight end name on the list is Gerald Everett of the Los Angeles Chargers. Really nice target rate this past week, 33%. He had 8, so that's 8 targets, 5 catches, 41 yards. Chargers are banged up across the board, Nate. So Gerald Everett maybe potentially the last man standing here.
Yeah, he seemed to be a favorite target of Easton Stick so far. Keenan Allen was his favorite target in week 13 over that half of football, but Allen missed this past week, so Everett became the new favorite target. And Everett was also targeted a decent amount in week 13 as well. So I think the big thing is he should see a decent number of targets. It's also worth noting that Donald Parham, who has been rotating a lot with Everett, missed this past week, so that also contributed to Everett having a good game. But they faced the Broncos in week 17, and Everett just recently had a decent game against the Broncos, and I think with the injuries they've had at receiver, Everett could have an even bigger game against Denver this time around. So definitely not trusting him this week against the Buffalo Bills, but if you need a tight end specifically for week 17, out of all of the guys on the waiver wire, Everett's the one that I would consider the most.
Nice. And then the last name on the list here, continuing the Green Bay Packers waiver wire factory that they've been. Tucker Kraft makes the list now. He's rostered in just 3.3% of ESPN leagues. He's been playing really well recently. So we like Tucker Kraft here to finish the season strong.
Yeah, caught 4 passes, 57 yards, and a touchdown this past week against Tampa Bay. Has fully taken over as the lead tight end with Luke Musgrave out. He's played in at least 95% of offensive snaps each of the last 4 games. Had a solid performance the week before, 4 receptions, 64 yards. The matchups these next 2 weeks really aren't that great for the Packers, but if you look at all the other tight ends who are available in at least 90% of ESPN leagues, Kraft is the clear one to like among all of the tight ends in that group, just with his playing time and his targets, regardless of the matchups that are upcoming. So obviously not liking him in most leagues in most situations, but especially something like the Scott Fish Bowl, which is a tight end premium league, or any other tight end premium leagues where you start multiple tight ends as well. Kraft is someone who's at least worth considering starting there.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I'll be starting Tucker Kraft again in a deeper league as well this week. So like that. All right, before we move on to our 5-round draft, which is a fun one today. People will want to stay tuned for that one. We do have some questions here from the comment section. And starting, well, so Don said he needs a quarterback. That was right at the beginning. We started when we talked about the waiver wire targets. So that one we covered. But Jesse Salgado asks, do I start Robinson or Walker? So I'm assuming this is Bijan Robinson or Kenneth Walker is my best guess here. Nate, you got a preference for one of these two running backs going forward?
I'm guessing it'll be Robinson based on the matchups, even though it was the risky performance this past week. But I will be doing my rankings later today, and they will be up on the website. So right now, my guess is my answer will be Robinson, but I will have better know that in a couple hours from now.
Makes sense. There you go. So make sure to check pff.com. You can find Nate's rankings there. Anthony Garcia says, "Guys, help, please." So he's lost his quarterbacks at like a lot of us, Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. He currently has Kyler Murray, not feeling too confident. Mentions Jordan Love, Gardner Minshew, Joe Flacco, Nick Mullins, Baker Mayfield, and Jake Browning are available. Does he stick with Kyler Murray or does he stream one of the other two or one of the other quarterbacks?
Jordan Love is the one who stands out on that list just with how well Love has been playing recently. Again, we'll have the rankings out, and I would just pick up whoever I have ranked higher on the list, regardless of what's going to happen week 17. Ideally, you have the spots on the roster to have two quarterbacks. Mullins, also the guy that we mentioned, has a good matchup this upcoming week, so I think Mullins is also worth considering, but check out the rankings after the show and I'll have a better answer there.
Gotcha. All right, we got a couple more here. Mark Esposito asks Montgomery for Indy if Pittman out. So DJ Montgomery, who we saw score a touchdown on Saturday. Michael Pittman going through the concussion protocol, I believe. There's potential that he misses this game. Would you feel comfortable starting at DJ Montgomery this week?
I would in deeper leagues, but I'm not trusting him too much just because the defense might not have been fully prepared for Montgomery, and we could see the team change a little bit how they're utilizing the wide receivers. They like Alec Pierce is still going to be the other outside receiver. I think Pierce is probably the one that I would trust the most out of the two just because he's been starting all year long. And then there's a chance they might rotate a little bit more in and out since they had some wide receivers inactive just because they didn't think they'd need too many wide receivers. So they will have more active wide receivers this upcoming week if Pittman's out, which could lead to a little bit more of a rotation. So I think I'd at least trust him to see a decent amount of playing time, but I don't know that he'd continue to see a high number of targets.
Yep, I'm with you. All right. Drew the Incredible asks, should I play Josh Palmer, Jaden Reed, or wait and see if Pacheco gets ruled out and play CEH in my flex? So flex question here. We think Pacheco's going to play, so could potentially come down to Josh Palmer or Jaden Reed.
I love this part of the fantasy season where people start asking start-sit questions on a Tuesday because that's how stressed out they get about their lineups. And I'm going to be that way too. I'll be setting starting lineups later today for all of my teams. The rankings will have a better understanding once I start having a better look at everyone's matchups this upcoming week. I think in general, if Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the starter and Pacheco's out again, I'd be starting him in most formats and most situations. So definitely worth considering Clyde Edwards-Helaire there. But I think Jaden Reed is probably someone I trust over Josh Palmer, especially with the quarterback situation in Los Angeles and the change in coaching staff and everything. And Palmer coming back from injury, like he didn't have anything in the first half. Almost all of his production came on one deep play this past week where he was pretty wide open. So if he doesn't have that one play, his stat line doesn't look nearly as good this past week. So Reed's been a bit more consistent, getting involved in the passing game, the running game. So Reed is probably the person I'd start over Palmer.
Nice. I like it. And then looks like the last one here, I'll give you guys a little bit more time to put questions in if you have them when we go through our draft. But Adam Heim writes, do we trust Deontay Foreman this week in standard scoring? So again, we don't necessarily know who he's trusting him against here, but you feel okay about having to put Deontay Foreman into a starting lineup this week?
In general, not really, based on how the Bears were rotating running backs this past week. Foreman wasn't having that great of a game, so we saw a bit more Khalil Herbert than we've been seeing. We even saw more Roschon Johnson in early runs, as well as keeping the passing down work that he's had all season. So really, it was like all three guys getting 5 to 6 carries in the run game, so that in itself is concerning. And then they are playing Arizona, so it's a game where they could have a pretty good game script. So a lot of it just depends on who the alternatives are, but I could very well see Khalil Herbert and Roshan Johnson again getting really involved, or it could be a game where Foreman's back to seeing double-digit carries. It really depends on who ends up running the ball well for them, but it seems like they were happy, at least considering a rotation pretty early on in that game. Foreman was playing on the first drive, Herbert was playing on the second drive, so they were already starting to rotate by the second drive. So it'll be a risky thing. It's at least worth considering, just depending on who your other running backs are, but it's risky.
Yeah, Bears backfield definitely risky there. But yeah, I'm with you. If there is one, I guess that you probably have to start, it's probably Foreman. But like you said, depending on who those options are. So thank you guys very much for the questions. Hopefully that helps. I know it, like Nate said, it is a very stressful time of year as we are into the second round now of the fantasy football playoffs. But other than that, we will wrap up the fantasy portion of our, or at least our waiver wire targets portion of the episode today, because we're going to stick with fantasy football for our 5-round draft this week. And we decided to go with our early 2024 draft ranking. So looking at who we think is going to go in what order in 2024 drafts, essentially trying to pick out their ADP. It's at this point in the season, the 2023 isn't even done yet. We haven't seen even a second of the offseason. We have no idea how the offseason is going to go. Anything can happen here, but we're going to base it on what we're seeing this year right now and try to put a little list together. So feel free to yell at us in the comments if you disagree, or if you agree as well. That would be nice. But here we go. Nate, you are going to have the first overall pick here. Where are you going if you have to draft a 2024 team today?
I think I am sticking with Christian McCaffrey at the very top for another year. Had him at the top of my rankings this year and was happy with it. He could very well end the season with about 100 more fantasy points than the next closest running back. Just in terms of the combination of his talent, I believe he's currently our highest graded running back at PFF. How he's used in San Francisco, the offense San Francisco's in, and there's plenty of uncertainty with plenty of other running back situations with what will happen in the offseason. I can be fairly confident that McCaffrey will still be the lead running back for San Francisco, that the coaching staff is going to stay intact, that a lot of the other parts of the offense will stay intact. And if anything, the offensive line hasn't been playing all that great this year. There's a possibility that they can improve the offensive line over the offseason, in which case the offense could be playing even better than they are now. So McCaffrey, the one running back I feel like I can trust in, having him over all the other running backs. I think anyone who's had him this year has been happy that they've had him, and I think they can be again next year.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think everybody's happy that they picked Christian McCaffrey this year. So yeah, I think that's the clear number one right now as well. And like you said, after that, the running back situations across the league get a little bit sketchier. So I think what I'll do is I will go wide receiver instead, try to pick some stability here. I have no idea who's going to be quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings next season, but I do feel pretty good that Justin Jefferson is still an elite wide receiver in the NFL. I was tempted to go with another player here, but I think I'm just going to go a little bit safer here early in the draft. Again, there's so much uncertainty at this point of the season, and just go with Justin Jefferson as the second overall pick. I think it'll be safe to say that he'll be a first round pick. So maybe a little higher here at number 2, but that's basically where he was going this year as well.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of debate of which wide receivers you're picking in these first couple of picks, or the order that you're picking them in at the very least. Debating who I'd want to go here, but I think Tyreek Hill is the one that I'm going to have as the tiebreaker over some of these others, just with how well he's playing this year. Was almost going to get 2,000 yards, and maybe he even still can get 2,000 yards if he plays well enough in these last 3 games. Will be turning 30 before the start of next season, so starting to get on the little bit older side for the wide receiver, and the other players you're considering are a bit younger, so that's probably the one red flag for him, is just with age, maybe he starts to slow down a little bit, but he hasn't shown any signs of slowing down so far this season. So still going to trust Hill at this point. And again, a more stable situation where I trust the coaching staff will stay intact in Miami. Trust Tua will remain the quarterback in Miami. So a relatively stable situation.
Yep, that was the other name that I was considering there. Man, I okay. So so this will be the fourth overall pick here. Again, I don't know that I trust any of the running backs this high, so I might go wide receiver again here. It doesn't really matter who I picked earlier. It's between. I don't even want to say who it's between, because then that gives away my other options here. So I guess I'll go. Um, I'm going to go Jamar Chase. Joe Burrow, obviously, has been banged up this year. Has been dealing with injuries. So we haven't seen the full Joe Burrow Jamar Chase connection that we were hoping this year. Banking on them being healthy next season and getting back to that in 2024. So I'll go Jamar Chase here.
Well, that makes my next decision a little bit easier. I will be going with CD Lamb for my
Yeah.
next pick. Being able to get the top players at running back and the top two wide receivers with my first two picks. Happy to see that. And Lamb, someone who's improved this season, and there's a chance he could continue to improve. He's become among the top wide receivers, but he's still relatively young for how long he's been in the league so far. So a chance he gets better, and the Cowboys in general. Offensive line has been playing great. The quarterback situation, Dak should still be there. Hopefully, they don't have a big, ugly contract situation with him, but I'm going to bank on them being able to work things out, and Dak will be happy for next year. So I'll go with CeeDee Lamb for my next pick.
Yeah, that was definitely the other name that I was considering there. All right, I am gonna go probably running back here to switch it up a little bit, and I think I'll go Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Etienne has had some decent usage. Hasn't obviously been the most effective runner, but there wasn't. Coming into the year, there was the concern that Tank Bigsby was going to work, and we haven't really seen that this year. So as far as usage and volume goes, and we're starting to see him get more involved as a receiver as well. I think Jacksonville could be potentially an ascending team. I know they've had their struggles this year as well, but it'll be another year with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback too. So feels risky, but I'm going to go Travis Etienne and move him into the first round.
Fair enough, Ben. We are kind of picking regardless of who we've already picked. So I'm
Yeah.
going to keep going wide receivers, even though I've already picked two wide receivers. But I'm thinking of this of if I have the seventh overall pick in the draft and the six guys we've already mentioned have been picked and I'm starting a new team. So sticking with wide receiver, I'm going to go with A.J. Brown for the next one. He's currently fourth in fantasy points on the season. Uh, Again, it's kind of a tiebreaker of he's in a more stable situation where Jalen Hurts is going to stay the quarterback, the coaching staff's staying intact. I still expect the offense to do well, even though they haven't been playing quite as well in the past few weeks. But I'm trusting A.J. Brown's talent in general to stay among the elite wide receivers. And like you've been saying with the running backs, we're really seeing a bit of instability at the top of at running back outside of CMC. A lot of the guys who are doing well this year, part of it's just they're the ones getting the volume. A lot of the guys that we drafted highly last year haven't quite been panning out. Where these wide receivers, it's a bunch of guys that we've been drafting highly year after year, and they just keep producing, and we know that they're going to keep producing. So I think next year we're going to see the first round be very wide receiver heavy.
I couldn't agree more. I think it is going to be wide receiver heavy, especially who knows what's going to happen in the offseason and through the draft with maybe these teams drafting more running backs for competition for some of these starters. So I don't have that concern necessarily with a lot of these wide receivers, and even my next pick on the list is going to be another wide receiver. I'm going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's time we move him into the first round. He's been amazing this year, and yeah, don't see him, having any. I mean, Jameson Williams sure is on the rise. Potentially could be a breakout next season, but Amon-Ra St. Brown has been the clear, wide receiver one for that team, and obviously Sam Laporta there as well. But just been the one constant week in and week out. So I really trust the volume and the consistency of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I
Think
think
I'm
you.
going to stick with the
Sorry.
Detroit Lions for my last pick. And I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs. He was the
Nice.
one other running back that I was really considering here. He's if you ignore the first couple weeks of the season where his usage wasn't all that great at times, he's one of 3 running backs to average over 20 PPR points from week 5 to now. Kyron Williams being the other one, but I'm not sure what all the Rams might do at running back to get Williams a little bit help over the offseason. So at least slightly concerned about Williams just from that factor. Gibbs has been grading really well. I know they still have David Montgomery and wouldn't be surprised if they still have Montgomery next year, but I think they like to give the ball to running back so much that I think, and how much they've invested in Gibbs and how well he's graded and played, Gibbs is kind of the one other running back that I might be trusting outside of CMC next year. But again, we have a long offseason where we could see one of these free agent running backs land in a dream scenario, or some other running back who's graded well and no longer have as much competition. There's lots of things that can happen at the running back position this offseason.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot that can and will likely happen for the running back. So, but I like the Jahmyr Gibbs pick. Actually, he was on my list, and I think it makes sense. And yeah, there's other options we could put in here. I mean, it's just, like I'm tempted to put Bijan Robinson, but if Arthur Smith is going to be head coach next year, I don't want to mess around with the Atlanta Falcons. So I don't know that I would trust Bijan Robinson in the first round. Really like James Cook. Like you said, Kyron Williams, if nothing happens there for the Rams, I think, his usage has earned himself a very high pick in drafts. I'll go with the hot takey one. I'm going to go with Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have been calling him Christian McCaffrey light recently, just because the usage and his involvement as a receiver and his efficiency as a receiver obviously hasn't been amazing as a runner, but he's definitely had his games there as well, just getting all the touches for that Tampa Bay backfield and doing a lot with them and producing consistently high numbers for fantasy purposes. So I'll make it a little spicy here. It's still 2023, so why not? Let's go Rachaad White in the first round.
Fair enough. If you didn't pick a running back earlier, and I was stuck picking my ninth best option, Rashee Rice was the next person on my list after how well he's played these last couple weeks. He's graded among the top wide receivers, and he's not going to have the same problem next year where he's fighting for playing time for 3/4 of the season. Rice consistently getting 7 or 8 catches for like 90 yards and a touchdown most of these recent games. So having a full season with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce getting 1 year older, Rice could be the clear top receiver for Kansas City next year with Patrick Mahomes. So Rice, I'm not sure he'll end up making it to the first round next year, but I think he's someone who's going to be drafted a lot higher than people were thinking a month ago, if people were doing 2024 rankings a month ago.
Yeah, love that. Rashee Rice he's been awesome when given the opportunity, and now that he is getting the opportunity, I mean, who knows? Again, we'll see. We could see Kansas City, add more wide receiver help. That's definitely something they need this offseason, considering the struggles they've had there. But yeah, noticeably, Travis Kelce out of our top 10 here. He'd been like the 6th overall pick, but you kind of feel it a little bit, right? Getting a little bit older here. We've seen a little bit of the drop off for Travis Kelce this season. He's not even the clear tight end one this year. I think TJ Hawkinson is ahead of him and Sam Laporta nipping at his heels there. So it'll be a fun off season to kind of go through this and see how ADP changes and see if we were right about any of these. But just a quick recap, Nate, you had Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, and Jahmyr Gibbs. I had Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Travis Etienne, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Rachaad White in there. So some definite names that we didn't add in here that could potentially get in there, but feel free to let us know about it in the comments, and I'll put the poll out there on Twitter today, and I'm sure we'll see some comments for that as well. So that is going to wrap up our episode for today. Thank you all very much for listening. Nate, thank you for coming up for the big list of waiver wire targets to go through. And yeah, before you go, please let everybody else know what you have up on pff.com this week.
So I'll have my rankings up later today for all of you that had start sit questions already and are trying to make those kind of decisions for your lineup, but that's when I really start looking ahead to all of the matchups for all of the players. So we'll have a better idea for all of those within the next couple hours, and then the article for rankings will be up tomorrow. I have the recap for all of the games that have happened this past week all up on the website, and the waiver article. If you missed anything that we talked about today or just want to go over it in a little bit more detail, so that is also up. We'll have start set article up on Thursday, and then just to go over a little bit going forward as well, because we have the holiday season coming up. I will no longer be writing the full recaps for games this upcoming weekend, giving myself and the editors a bit more time for the holidays. So I will be a bit more active on social media with game recap like things, posting some of the graphs that I usually post in the articles. I'll be posting those on social media. So you'll still be able to get a lot of that. We will not be having our show next Monday like we usually do. But then Tuesday, we will kind of have a hybrid, go over some of the top recap things from the past week and then also go over waivers. But with week 17 waivers, we might only have 10 or so guys, so that'll cut the episode in half. So half the episode on waivers, half the episode on recaps, and then we'll be like normal next week. After that point, we'll still have rankings out like normal. We'll still have start sit out like normal. But after that, it's basically the end of the fantasy season from there. So my time at PFF is kind of split between fantasy and being a software developer on the B2B side. So starting January, you won't be seeing as much of me. You'll still be seeing John plenty. And then I'll be back again more once we get closer to the 2024 season.
Nice. Sounds good. Yeah. And then as for me, I'll have the IDP fantasy report up on pff.com this afternoon. So you'll find all your IDP waiver wire targets in there. I'll be back tomorrow with the weekly IDP preview, back with Kate on Thursday doing the week 16 offensive preview as well. So be sure to check those out. And yeah, thank you all again for listening. And until next time, peace out.